Alright, here we are. Senate List Part 4. Again, gonna be stuck doing this for a while now. Probably the last top 10 of this series, so I can speed through and get more of them done faster. Also, this is the last one that I did before I started thinking to make this like a full-on series and plan ahead to find a lot more people. So there are a lot more people on this list that I'm actually not that enthused about saying anymore. Literally, check out how old this script is. But we'll go through the list as it is now and then hopefully fix all these during when I re-rank them. Alright, here we go. Number 10, William Borah. Borah can really be defined with one word: maverick. It seems that he always bucked against what was considered the mainstream political consensus, which has gotten him a lot of praise and ire, even from people who were on his side. His biggest clash was in regards to foreign policy, being a staunch non-interventionist to the point where it seemed to be all that he would talk about. He decried Wilson's potential intervention in Latin America, particularly him choosing to recognize Victoriano Huerta as the leader of Mexico, while Borah believed that Mexicans should be the ones to choose their leader, supporting a diplomatic relationship with the USSR rather than the heavily antagonistic one that we did have. But most controversially was him being part of the irreconciliables. He also pushed hard for Glass-Steagall and voted against the Federal Reserve Act, viewing it as a handout for the rich. However, he's the only person on this list that I can really think of that I can't really go further without acknowledging some of his biggest glaring flaws. As Teddy Roosevelt himself put it, Borah was an insurgent whose chief talent was to insurge. And even if he himself agreed on a specific policy, he somehow worked a way for him to be against it, such as women's suffrage, whereas he himself viewed it to be a impending issue, voted against it in the Senate because he felt that it was a states' rights issue. But the biggest criticism in this regard was how he bucked against the US establishment in the lead up to World War II. Borah, of course being an interventionist, didn't want the US to get involved in any potential conflict overseas, and he was very critical of people who wanted to get involved in the conflict overseas. And as tensions started to grow between Nazi Germany and America, Borah himself offered to be a mediator between the two groups. Well-intentioned nature, but in order to offer himself as that figure, he very much went soft on Hitler, refusing to criticize him, to the point that when Borah died, Joseph Goebbels wrote a very positive obituary to him. If I honestly thought that this was coming from any form of malice, then I would not have him on this list at all. And from what I have seen looking into this, it seems that this was literally just Borah being extremely naive. He literally did believe that he could have stopped World War II from happening if he had just talked to Hitler. I mean, it's better than some members of Congress who were just openly pro-Hitler, and some not so openly. It was just Borah being naive and an isolationist that led him down this path. Since at this point we're not even praising him anymore, let's move on. Number 9, Ernest Gruening. One of Alaska's first senators, Gruening was the guy Gravel would replace. But that notion must mean that he was bad, right? Well, no, Gruening was pretty good. First, he introduced a congressional resolution that created the 911 number to begin with. However, he would become more notable for being one of 2 senators to vote against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, and becoming one of the loudest anti-Vietnam War voices in the Senate. Writing in The Nation, it is, and for some time has been, obvious that the most important issue facing our nation is to get out of the war in Southeast Asia. All our other issues and problems are slighted, impaired, and unresolved until we halt the fighting, stop the continuing drain of blood and treasure, and turn to the long-neglected, pressing needs at home. Ernest even got in a debate with Assistant Secretary of State of East Asia and Pacific Affairs, where he told him point blank, after you have been bombing villagers with napalm, it's going to be very difficult to persuade people that you are their friend. And unfortunately, that's when Gravel entered the scene and Gruening left the scene. But honestly, for the time that he was there, those two things are pretty impactful, and I would have to give him a lot of praise, especially for being one of the earliest people to call out this specific issue. The problem is, that was basically all he had, while Wayne Morse had a lot more. Number 8, Salmon P. Chase. Chase was one of the founders of the Free Soil and Republican parties as a way to unite abolitionists across the country in a party that could become the torchbearer for the cause of anti-slavery. Chase would then take up the role that used to belong to Hale as one of Congress's leading voices against slavery, arguing against the Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act, although, to be honest, that's basically it for Chase. Similar to the last guy, they really only had one pet issue. But I have to give a little bit of credit. Salmon P. Chase's pet issue, a bit more important than Gruening's issue.
Get Douglas.
Each Dixie boy must understand that he must mind his Uncle Sam away, away. We'll all go down to Dixie.
Number 7, Joseph Guffey, the first Democratic senator elected in Pennsylvania since 1874. Guffey ended up winning that title by being a huge champion of organized labor. He was a huge supporter of not only Roosevelt, but the entire left flank of the party, such as Wallace and Pepper. He frequently found himself in arguments and debates with opposition, such as a large argument he had with Harry J. Anslinger, not only due to his drug positions, but the fact that he used the N-word in official government documents. Another was when he accused the owner of a well-off Philadelphia newspaper of attempting to buy the governorship of Pennsylvania for his hand-picked candidate on radio. Unfortunately, he was unable to do much after the Republicans took power, and soon he himself was out of power. But Guffey does have a very good place in history. Number 6, Henry M. Teller. Teller was a very interesting first senator from Colorado, and while most states' first senators are interesting for bad reasons, this one was interesting for a good reason. He was a huge supporter of bimetallism and fought hard for the GOP to adopt it into their platform. But after they tried to remove it in the following election, Teller led a walkout to form the Silver Republican Party, which he would serve the remainder of his first term in. However, by his second term, that issue was not really prevalent anymore, so he would leave to join the Democratic Party. What earns him a spot on here is actually two other issues completely unrelated to bimetallism. His biggest accomplishment was the aptly named Teller Amendment, which stated point blank that after the Spanish-American War, the U.S. would not annex Cuba. But one issue that is very ahead of its time was his opposition to the Dawes Act, which was an act that would take communal Native American land, then allot it up to individual Native Americans, then give the U.S. the excess. Basically, think of the land redistribution under a lot of Latin American countries, but instead of helping the poor and disadvantaged, it's to hurt them. And Teller himself understood this, saying that it was truly trying to despoil the Indians of their lands and to make them vagabonds on the face of the earth. And he was not at all wrong on that. A pro-Native American senator, give him a round of applause. Number 5, Howard Metzenbaum. Metzenbaum was a very prominent progressive in the now budding conservative wave of the 70s to 90s, which earned him a decent amount of ire from those set conservatives, giving him nicknames like Senator No, Headline Howard, and one special one from Fritz Hollings calling him the Senator from B9B. His hardcore progressive platform were particularly focused on antitrust and consumer protection legislation, even consistently threatening to repeal the antitrust exemption for the Major League of Baseball. Given his time period, he of course frequently clashed with reactionary conservatives, to the point that one of his opponents literally made up a lie that was so heinous that one of his other political adversaries, John Glenn, stepped in to vouch for Howard. If all these people went to such big lengths to try and stop him, he must have been doing something right. Number 4, James Abourezk, the first Arabic member of the Senate. He made a decent impact in the 6 years he spent there. Abourezk focused on two major things during his term: rallying against the US's foreign policy, criticizing the Office of Public Safety for training people in Latin America to participate in illegal activities like dirty wars and such. His other major interest was in regards to the indigenous population in the United States, creating and chairing the American Indian Policy Review Commission and the Select Committee on Indian Affairs. He worked to pass the Indian Self-Determination Act, which gave indigenous tribes more autonomy, but the bill that would end up becoming his signature bill would be the Indian Child Welfare Act, which tried to prevent Native American family separation. Aberzik decided to retire after one term, but as I said before, that one term was somewhat impactful. Number 3, Edward Brooke. Brooke was notable due to being the first African American to be directly elected to the Senate. Said notable election set Brooke apart from the rest of the Senate, which put him in the spotlight. Brooke used that opportunity to lead the slowly dying progressive wing of the GOP, holding weekly meetings with them called the Wednesday Club. Brooke's biggest focus was in regards to affordable housing, co-authoring the 1968 Fair Housing Act, which banned housing discrimination, and more notably, authored what would be known as the Brooke Amendment, which capped rent in public housing to 25% of the tenant's income. He also led the charge to stop 2 of Nixon's SCOTUS nominees, only voting for one of them because they were pro-abortion. That ended up costing him re-election, but it still earns him a spot in my heart. Number 2, Charles Sumner. Sumner is probably the only senator that is not known for a bill or something that he did, but rather something that happened to him. You see, Sumner was an abolitionist Republican and gave a speech decrying the Kansas-Nebraska Act, as well as the act's authors, Stephen A. Douglas and Andrew Butler. However, that ticked off Butler's cousin, Representative Preston Brooks, who decided to beat Sumner with his cane nearly to death. And this was on the Senate floor, mind you. This incident not only, of course, raising the issue of slavery and abolition more clearly, it also propelled Charles Sumner into becoming one of the largest figures in America at the time. Now, normally, after that incident, you would think Sumner would retire or something, but no, he remained a leading figure against slavery and for civil rights and abolition. He also pushed for the recognition of Haiti as an independent nation. When asked why continue, he responded with, "When crime and criminals are thrust before us, they are to be met by all the energies that God has given us by argument, scorn, sarcasm, and denunciation." Pardon my French, but that's badass right there. And number 1, for now, Richard F. Pettigrew, the first senator from South Dakota. Pettigrew was one of the leading figures of the Silver Republicans, a group of Republicans forming their own caucus because they supported bimetallism. While this faction was obviously progressive, Pettigrew seemed to be more radical than that, seemingly being a socialist. Don't believe me? Let's take some choice quotes from Pettigrew. "Capital is stolen labor, and its only function is to steal more labor. Free land makes free people. Capitalism produced the war. Capitalism profited from the war. The Russian Revolution is the greatest event of our times. It marks the beginning of the epoch when the working people will assume the task of directing and controlling industry. It blazes a path into this unknown country where the workers of the world are destined to take from their exploiters the right to control and direct the economic affairs of the community." Another thing Pettigrew rallied hard against was U.S. imperialism, particularly in Hawaii and World War I. The latter one nearly got him in jail for the Espionage Act. While he was not in the Senate too long, he definitely did make an impact. Is the list done? Am I able to do something else now? Oh, phew. Finally, I'm able to do something else. Oh wait, I have to do the end card. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to notify if a future video of mine comes out. And if you want more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.